Tales from the Hood. The anthology's pretty good. Hosted by Clarence Wills III. Wings Hauser plays quite the turd. Tales from the Hood. Crooked cops and dolls made of wood. David Allen Greer's a piece of shit, but I like it anyway. Tales from the Hood from 1995 is a specifically urban take on the subgenre. Written and directed by Rusty Cundiff and Darren Scott, and directed by Cundiff. It was also produced in part by Spike Lee, and it definitely shows throughout the film. The segments are filled with political and racial themes within the subtext, whether it's, extremely on the nose or not, which is still relevant today, close to 30 years after the film was released. This was the first time I've watched the film since I first rented it when it came out on VHS with my family back in the old Mr. Movies days. So it was interesting watching it again for the second time after so long. There's 4 main segments, and I was impressed with how much I actually remembered, considering how long it's been. I recalled bits and pieces of the first 3, but somehow forgot about the 4th segment entirely. We'll get to that. So without further ado, here is Tales from the Hood. Welcome to the Mortuary is the title of the intro, epilogue, and wraparound segments that consist of these 4 main segments. It takes place in South Central LA, and 3 drug dealers go into this mortuary, which is run by a very eccentric owner, Mr. Sims, played brilliantly by Clarence Williams III. Mr. Sims gets these 3 drug dealers to come inside his mortuary with the promise of shit, which is, slang for the drugs, that he claims to have found in an alley, and he was going to sell to these gangsters to, what drug dealing is, that whole thing. As Mr. Sims walks them through his mortuary, he tells tales of the recently deceased who are lying around in coffins throughout, and that is what makes up the 4 main stories. First segment, called Rogue Cop Revelation, was very timely when it was released. It very heavily echoed the fairly recent Rodney King beating that was all over the news that I remember even as a kid, seeing it everywhere. It's sadly just as relevant now, especially given the fairly recent murder of George Floyd, which happened within my home state, not even half an hour from where I live. The film tells a story about a city councilman and black rights activist named Martin Ezekiel Morehouse, not unlike Martin Luther King. He is pulled over for no reason by racist police officers who then, smash his taillight and fabricate the whole scene to make him look bad. Essentially, these officers pulled him over because he has uncovered a corrupt police system, causing some of their co-workers and friends to have gotten fired from the service. Wings Hauser plays the epitome of piece of shit police officer in this film. He leads his 2 other white police officer co-workers to beat Mr. Morehouse essentially to death, and not only plant drugs in his car, but also in his body as well by shooting him up with heroin right before throwing his vehicle into a nearby body of water. Not only destroying his life, but also his credibility and his legacy as well. All this stuff happens in front of the rookie cop, which is another African American, who is basically told to be quiet and stay out of the way as this is all happening. That officer's name is Clarence Smith, and he begrudgingly does so, even though he recognizes the man and respects him, obviously. But he doesn't want to get in the middle of it, and obviously doesn't want something just as bad or worse to happen to him. This experience haunts Clarence, literally, as he has visions about a year after quitting the force of Mr. Morehouse telling him to bring them to him. Since he's good at following orders, he does so, The police officers are still just as, if not more, disrespectful while the man is dead. They urinate on his grave while trying to force the second police officer to do so. Morehouse rises from the grave as a pretty damn cool looking zombie, and he takes his revenge on all the police officers that wronged him, and Clarence as well. The second segment is entitled Boys Do Get Bruised. This is the one I remember the most as a kid for some reason. Probably because I was around the same age as the boy in the title referring to when the film came out, and also because it has a very surprising but terrifyingly good dramatic role from David Alan Grier, who I always loved on In Living Color, and he is the like stereotypical wife beating stepdad that you never want to see in your house in this film. David Alan Grier's character is named Carl, and the boy is named Walter. The mother, I believe, was named Sissy, if I remember right. Weird name. But the boy, Walter, shows up at school, and his teacher notices bruising on his eyes and face and inquires about it, obviously. And the boy tells him that the monster did it. He refers to David Alan Grier's character as a monster, and he makes drawings of the monster, of what he sees him as in class, including other drawings of school bullies and things of that nature. Walter learns that his drawings have a lot more power than he originally assumed. He just, in passing, crumples up the drawing of his school bully who beat him up a day or two prior, and that causes the bully to immediately collapse down a flight of stairs, breaking all of his limbs. So it's like a voodoo doll through a drawing, essentially, is what this plays out as. The teacher, which is actually played by the writer-director, goes over to the home, obviously, upsetting David Alan Grier's character, Carl. And as soon as the teacher leaves, he instantly begins beating on the mother, but luckily the teacher sees this and hears this happening through the window upstairs, so he goes back in to try to help, and then ends up getting into a huge fight with him, and it goes on for a few minutes. Horrible, savage beating in this movie, surprisingly. But just before he can finally get to Walter, he takes his monster drawing and begins to crease it around its arm, snapping David Alan Grier's arm in half, and it looks pretty damn cool too. And then he continues to do so very slowly and methodically, breaking his arms and legs, and then he crushes it like this, and he starts twisting on the floor. It's a very cool practical effect that is done by society legend Screamin' Mad George. So, if anything, it's worth giving a watch just for that. The third segment is called Kkk Comeuppance. This story is about a man named Duke Metker, played to douchey perfection by Corbin Burnson. He's an extremely racist Southern senator trying to run for governor, and he has black and Jewish protesters outside of his house, which, to add insult to injury, is an old slave plantation that his ancestors once owned. One of the protesters tells a reporter outside that the house is haunted by dolls that an old voodoo woman made of all of the slaves that were killed there, and put their souls into these dolls. These dolls were made by the Chiodo brothers also, which I thought was cool. I didn't realize that until after I watched the film again. Although he claims to have searched the house high and low for these dolls because it's a legendary myth in the area, just because they might be worth something, he found nothing. In the home is a huge mural painting of Miss Cobbs, who is the voodoo woman, surrounded by these dolls and holding one in hand. And they're creepy looking. Unknowingly to Duke, the doll she is holding is no longer in the painting. It's whited out as if he were jumped off the painting. His public image consultant, whatever you want to call him, who is also an African-American man, so it's even more insulting that he'd be working for someone like this in the first place, is mysteriously killed by falling down the flight of stairs, and then on the floor, as if he were to trip over it, was the doll that came out of the painting. So Metker's going mad, trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and then more and more of the painting dummies have been disappearing. So then by the end of it, he is swarmed to death, literally, by dozens and dozens of Chiodo Brothers wooden dolls. It's a very good segment. It's comforting to know that now no one this hateful or racist could ever hold a public office of this type in this country. That would never happen. Hardcore Convert. That is the fourth and final segment of the film, the one I had zero recollection of until I watched it. I always remembered the voodoo dolls and David Allen Greer and some zombie guy thing. But for some reason, this whole part, nothing. Jerome Crazy K. Johns is a gangbanger in the area who is a homicidal psychopath and kills with zero remorse for anyone that he kills or affects by his murders. While driving around, he encounters his rival, Lil Deke, and murders him. And then Little Deke's friends, three of them, come and shoot down Crazy K, but they are interrupted by the police showing up. Crazy K is arrested and sent to prison for life, but in prison, he meets a doctor by the name of Dr. Cushing, who wants him to take part in an extreme experiment that would get him out of prison if it succeeds. So, of course, he agrees to do so. First, he is put in a cell adjacent to a white supremacist who basically teaches him the lesson that they're more alike than he thinks, in the fact that they both kill black people with absolutely no remorse. And then he's put through a torture process, kind of like in Clockwork Orange, where he's forced to watch footage of lynchings and the KKK in the past in a way to brainwash him, essentially. And then he's put into a sensory deprivation tank where he sees the images of everyone he wrongfully killed, including a young girl who was murdered by a stray bullet. Even after all this, he has no remorse and takes no responsibility for his actions. And because of that, he is instantly flashed back to the moment of him being shot in the street. It's like he was in limbo, you could say, where he chooses not to do the right thing, and then he is finally murdered by these three gangsters in the street who leave him for dead. The Mortuary epilogue sees these three gangsters, who you find out are the three gangsters from the previous one who killed Crazy K in the street, and they are led into the final room of the mortuary where Mr. Sims has three coffins lined up that he claims have the shit in them. Every time he says the shit, it's hilarious. But as they open them, they see that it is not filled with the shit. It is filled with their dead bodies. Yes, they were killed by the police at the same time as they killed Crazy K. And this is not a mortuary at all. Mr. Sims is the devil himself, and they are in hell. While it's not the greatest anthology film of all time, Tales from the Hood benefits from its individual stories having a lot of cultural relevance that other movies like this wouldn't have. It has lasting power for that reason. Like I said, I watched it 25 plus years later, and it's still making me think of stuff that happened 2 years ago, which is pathetic. And that's something that no other anthology film that I can think of can say. Do yourself a favor, seek it out. It has a very good Scream Factory Blu-ray, like many of the films I will be covering. It is still available. I recommend getting it. I think it's like $20. So that is what I have for you today for hashtag Anthology Horror August. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below. Do you like Tales from the Hood? I haven't seen its 2 sequels. Those exist. Are they any good? Maybe I'll watch them. Let me know if you've seen them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Talk, shop, pop, movies.